All right. Hello. Welcome back to Classic Comics and another Trek Talk live stream where I take a look at the making of one of the episodes of the original Star Trek series. Today, going to be taking a look at the original series episode, The Paradise Syndrome. Okay. I think who we got here? Oh, hey, Rogues 1138 is here. Good evening to you, Rogues. Thanks for being here. Okay, so this episode is yeah, it's one of the episodes from this original series that, hasn't aged so well for a couple of different reasons. And we'll talk about that. But overall it's not bad. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites by any means. And as usual, I will be looking or reading from the book These Are the Voyages by Mark Cushman for behind the scenes information. Now, Paradise Syndrome is episode 58 in production order. I am going in production order, not in order of broadcast. And let's see here. All right, so let's just go ahead and dive into this here. Now, this was written by Margaret Arman and directed by Judd Taylor. This is from an NBC press release issued September 9th, 1968. Captain Kirk is wed on Star Trek, and an asteroid hurtles toward a planet on which Captain Kirk has married a beautiful member of a tribe oblivious to their impending doom. In the Star Trek color cast on NBC Friday, October 4th, guest star Sabrina Sharf portrays Miramani, wife of Captain Kirk, and Rudy Solaro guest stars as Salish, a jealous suitor. Spock fails in his efforts to destroy the asteroid and returns to the planet with only hours remaining until its destruction. He attempts to decipher the coded instructions left on an ancient temple by the Preservers, those who left the civilization 3 centuries before. Now, the NBC press release does leave out vital information, such as how Kirk, while investigating a seemingly out of place, technically advanced object on the planet populated by a primitive culture, tumbles into a subterranean chamber, is hit by an energy beam, and as a result, has sudden amnesia. Unable to locate the captain, Spock must take command of the Enterprise in order to carry out their mission to meet the giant asteroid in space and use the ship's deflectors to alter its course. Meanwhile, Kirk, having risen from the obelisk and observed by the natives, is accepted as a god. As love blooms with the native girl Miramani, the tribe's former medicine man Salish, who has lost both his position with the tribe and his woman to Kirk, is determined to expose the white skinned intruder for the impostor he is. Two stories are taking place here. Kirk's story on the planet, where, relieved of the burden of command and the relentless ambition that had driven him, he lives among a simple, peaceful people, and Spock's story on the Enterprise, as his human side obsesses over the internal consequences of being the decision maker and the risks that come with being wrong. The linking theme focuses on the strains of command and the stresses caused by an accelerated modern lifestyle. And Rogue says Native Americans talking great English. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things is that, and obviously, to be fair, this isn't the first episode that does that. But they had, kind of taken pains to try and avoid that, where they go to some planet and, there are people there who obviously shouldn't be speaking English, but who are speaking it. But obviously, that kind of eroded. They were pretty good about it in the first season, but as the series went on, they eroded it, and as we see here, there's no reason these people should be speaking English, but they do anyway. Yes, I am Kirk. Okay, so 2001 A Space Odyssey was released in April of 1968, 2 months before this episode was filmed and 5 months before it aired. In that story as well, an advanced race of aliens leaves behind beacons for primitive races, but the concept was still fresh at the time, and there was much more at play in the Paradise Syndrome. The theme of the story is summed up in a line of dialogue in the script from Scott after Spock forces him to push the ship's engines too hard. Quote, machines are smarter than people. They know to quit before blowing themselves up. Spock not only pushes the ship, he pushes himself as well, almost to the point of breaking. Then there is Kirk, Gene Roddenberry's version of Captain Horatio Hornblower, a man driven by ambition and command who deep down longs for a simpler life. With all that drives him erased from his mind, he admits to Miramani that for the first time in his life he feels peaceful and happy. This story, even more so than The City on the Edge of Forever or Kirk's encounter with Ruth in Shorely, conveys the sadness inside the captain. And it brings us a tragic and heartfelt love story. Kirk gets his memory back, demanding that he return to his command in his life in space, the things he has strived for most in life, but his heart is breaking. The Paradise Syndrome isn't perfect. The Indians conveniently speak English, and that is silly. They wear headbands made of elastic, and that is absurd. Spock uses a pair of rocks to demonstrate to Dr. McCoy how two spatial bodies are moving towards one another, and that, especially for Spock, seems unscientific. The majority of the footage filmed on location in the forest area had to be looped, and the dubbing is sometimes obvious and distracting. McCoy plays devil's advocate to Spock as usual, but it seems quite forced here. And when the doctor suddenly announces he was wrong in blaming Spock, the character turn comes out of nowhere. The music heard during the Vulcan mind meld sequence sounds like 1960s psychedelia, and that is dated. But the Paradise Syndrome is nonetheless heartfelt. All right. So let's go ahead and dive into this one here. So we kick off, and this planet never really gets a proper name, I don't think. So I'm just going to be referring to it as the planet. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, they beam down to the planet and they marvel at the beauty of the nature and how similar to Earth it is. And then they discover this obelisk, which is, I don't know, about 50 feet tall or so. Now, Spock notes that the metal it's composed of is some unknown substance, and the tricorder can't penetrate it. And he can't get a date on it to guess how old it is. He also says that there's no evidence of a culture on the planet that could create something this advanced. Kirk asks how long they have before they must leave the planet, and Spock says that they have to divert an asteroid that is on course to collide with the planet. And to do that on time, they must leave in about 30 minutes. Then they detect life forms nearby and they go to investigate and discover a village of people who appear to be a mixture of Native American cultures. Now, they discuss if they should warn the natives about the asteroid, but Spock notes that, they wouldn't understand. And basically, all it would do is scare the hell out of them and it wouldn't really help them. And so they decide not to. Kirk expresses envy of the natives as they live this simple life and have no greater responsibilities or pressure on them other than really just living. And then says that it's time to go, but first he wants to examine the obelisk. So while Spock and McCoy are taking tricorder readings, he goes to take another look at it. And the obelisk has these inscriptions, these symbols on it. No, this isn't the best shot of them. Now, then he calls the Enterprise to beam up, but then a trap door opens and drops him down into a chamber under the ground. As he gets up, he hits some buttons on a instrument panel of some kind, or control panel, and it releases a powerful shock of some kind of an energy field, which renders him unconscious. Okay, now Spock and McCoy come to the obelisk. There's no Kirk around. They search for him. They use the tricorder. They can't detect him. And Spock says they have to go. Of course, McCoy doesn't want to leave Kirk behind, but Spock argues that they have to, because there's this asteroid coming to the planet, and There's this deflection point where the odds of deflecting the asteroid are best, and after that, as the asteroid gets closer, their ability to successfully deflect or divert the asteroid is going to diminish gradually. So they really need to make this rendezvous at this certain point. So finally, McCoy gives in and they beam away. Now, Kirk wakes and he now has soap opera amnesia. He doesn't remember who he is, doesn't remember how he got here or where he is. He doesn't recognize his communicator or his phaser, doesn't know what they are. So he looks around the chamber and eventually activates some kind of control that opens a trap door that allows him to exit. Now, as he comes up out of the obelisk, he comes out just as a pair of native women are arriving at the obelisk and they see him, so they bow down to worship him. And then one of the natives, of course, takes his hand. And she says, Kirk asks, "Who are you?" And she says that we are your people and we have been waiting for you. Meanwhile, the Enterprise is traveling at warp 9 to meet the asteroid at the optimal deflection point in time. Now, Scotty complains that they are pushing the engines too hard, but Spock insists they have to maintain speed. They cannot take the strain, Captain. Now, back on the planet, Kirk meets with the chieftain of the tribe and their shaman, who is named Salish. And this is Salish here. Now, the chief says he accepts the story that Kirk emerged from their temple and therefore must be important. But the shaman, Salish, is skeptical and insists that Kirk prove that he's a god. The chief explains to Kirk that the skies of the planet have repeatedly darkened recently and that this is an omen of some great danger to the tribe. He says that they have a legend that the great ones who place them on this world will send a god to aid them in their time of need and asks Kirk if he can help them. Now, Kirk tells them he did come from the temple, but remembers nothing before that. And then a young child is brought in who had fallen into the lake nearby and drowned. The shaman examines him and then says that the boy is dead and he can't be helped. But then Kirk performs mouth to mouth resuscitation on the kid and revives him. And of course, when he's able to revive the boy, they see him basically breathing life back into the dead. And the chief declares that, for him to restore life, Kirk must be a god and tells the shaman, Salish, to give Kirk his medicine badge, which he wears on his headband, which is this thing here. It's like the symbol of his position. And so he tells Salish to give it to Kirk. So Miramani, that's the woman, she removes his medicine badge. And as she does it, the headband, it clearly stretches a lot and it's clearly made of elastic, which, obviously a native tribe wouldn't have, but puts it on Kirk. And of course, they're all pretty happy with this. But of course, Salish doesn't like this. Not to quote the Joker, not one bit. Warp 9, yeah. Well, I mean, at the time, Warp 9, that was a lot, back in them days. Okay, so we go back to the Enterprise. The Enterprise arrives at the deflection point, and then they use the ship's main deflector to try and divert the asteroid, but it doesn't work. So Spock says that they must fall back to another position and then try to destroy the asteroid with the ship's phasers. Now, on the planet, Salish meets with the priestess Miramani and asks her what she's doing. Now, she says that she must attend to the needs of the god, which is Kirk. And Salish says that she should be working on their marriage cloak since they're supposed to get married soon. But Miramani's like, yeah, about that. So apparently in this tribe, so Salish was the medicine man or medicine chief, and traditionally the priestess and the medicine chief are wedded. But of course, Salish is no longer medicine chief. Kirk is. So now, of course, she's like, I'm like his now, not yours, which of course Salish doesn't like. He even goes so far as to ask if you could choose, would you choose me or him? And of course, she's like, yeah, I'll get back to you on that. Okay, now she goes back to Kirk, and he asks her to tell him about the wise ones, which are the aliens that put her people on this planet. Bones should get the medical ban. Well, actually, we'll talk about McCoy later because uh, McCoy doesn't come off looking too good in this episode. I'll just say that. You know, the way this episode's written, it really kind of makes him look kind of like a fool. But we'll get to that because it's right at the end. She says that the wise ones brought them to this world from far away and appointed a medicine man to keep the secrets of the temple and use them to protect the tribe when the skies darken. Now, the secrets of the temple are traditionally passed from father to son, but Salish's father died before he could impart the secrets to Salish, leaving the secrets lost to them. So, technically, although he was the medicine man, Salish really didn't have the knowledge to do the job, which I guess is just as well because Kirk doesn't really have the knowledge either. Now, then the chieftain arrives and he asks what Kirk wishes to be called, and Kirk tries to pronounce Kirk, but of course he can't really remember it properly, so he mispronounces it. And the chief interprets it as Kirok. You shall be known as Kirok. Then he asks if Kirk will help them, but Kirk says, like, well, what do you want me to do, man? I don't know. And the chieftain asks if they have displeased him in some way, and Kirk says no, but he needs time to remember before he can really do anything to help them. Now, let's see. Okay, so now the Enterprise attempts to destroy the asteroid with the ship's phasers. And first they fire like a pair of phaser banks. It isn't enough. So then he has Scotty fire all the phaser banks simultaneously, and that winds up overloading the engines and basically causing like a meltdown. So now the phasers are lost to them, and the warp drive is also out. Yeah, so Scotty tells Spock that the warp drive is now non-functional. They only have impulse power. Now, back on the planet, Kirk has assimilated into the native culture. You see, he's wearing their garb now. And Miramani tells him that her marriage cloak is ready, and when he asks about it, she explains that, of course, they're supposed to be wedded to one another. She asks if he would prefer someone else, but Kirk reveals that he loves her as well and agrees to the marriage. Now, back on the Enterprise, Spock is studying the. Oh, you say witch doctor for Bones? Eh, I don't know. He might as well be. I mean, for all the good he does in this episode, he might as well be a witch doctor. But Spock is studying the writing, the inscriptions on the obelisk, and of course, as usual, McCoy is all on his neck about do something, Spock. As if he's always on Spock's ass. It's what is Spock supposed to do? Wave a wand? It's like, dude, I'm doing the best I can here. Uh, Now, Scotty. Oh yeah, so Scotty tells them that the warp drive is now non-functional. So Spock asks how long it'll take for repairs, and Scotty says he can't even give an estimate for when the warp drive will be restored because they would need to get to a star base to effect repairs, and that could take months, if not years. Spock orders the Enterprise back to the planet, noting that it will take about 59 days at impulse power to get back, and the asteroid will be just a few hours behind them. So they'll only have a few hours to try and divert the asteroid and save the planet. Okay, now on the planet, Miramani observes that the marriage to Kirok will mean an end to their darkness that threatens them, and that it's a time of great joy and hope for their people. Everyone except Salish, who is not thrilled at all. Let's see where. Yeah, and let me move on here. So the chieftain is preparing Kirk or Kirok, excuse me, for the wedding ceremony. And Kirk, now this episode is interesting because there's a couple of times where he has an inner monologue, where you hear him speaking his thoughts in a voiceover. And this is one where he's kind of exulting in his life now, and he notes how happy he is. He's never been so happy, and he does it in this voiceover. I don't know. Here he kind of looks like he's doing like a residency in Vegas or something. I don't know. So then later he's walking in the forest, and he gets attacked by Salish, who tries to kill him with a knife. Now he cuts Kirk. Kirk bleeds, and of course, when Salish sees that, he says, "Aha! How can a god bleed?" And he attacks Kirk. Kirk manages to overpower and disarm him. Salish says, you better go ahead and kill me, because he's not going to stop until he's exposed Kirok as a fraud. But Kirok refuses to kill him and walks away. And then later, in a ceremony, Kirok and Miramani are wedded to one another. Now, back on the Enterprise, at this point, they're nearing the planet, and they say it's been 58 days, and the ship is approaching. McCoy says that Spock has been driving himself too hard, and he needs to get some rest. But Spock refuses, saying that deciphering the symbols on the obelisk may be the key to saving the planet and Captain Kirk. Yeah, Tahiti syndrome. Yeah, they mentioned that in the episode. When Kirk is talking about wanting to, about being envious of the simple life they're leading. Okay. Where was I? Okay, yeah. So now on the planet, Miramani and Kirk are frolicking in the woods together. And then Kirk tells Miramani that he couldn't be happier, but he's been having dreams about a lodge that moves through the sky. He also remembers faces and feels he should know who they are, and that part of him feels he belongs with them. Then Miramani says that she has a surprise, and then she goes to the bushes and pulls out what I believe is called a papoose, right? The little kind of satchel that they carry a baby in, which, it's convenient that they just happen to stop right there where the papoose is. But anyway, so she reveals she's pregnant. And of course, they're both very happy. But then later, a storm moves in, and Miramani says that they need to go to the temple. And when Kirk says, "Why is that?" and she says, "Well, it's time for you to save the village." And of course, he dismisses this and says, "Oh, it's just a storm. It won't hurt them." But she insists that the storms will get worse, and then there will be earthquakes where the earth trembles as well. Kirk says, "Well, what do you want me to do? There's nothing I can do about it." But she says he must enter the temple and awaken the spirits within it to save them. And of course, Kirk says, "I don't know how to do that." But she says that he is a god, so he will be able to. Then the chief and Salish arrive, asking why he hasn't gone to the temple like he's supposed to, saying that the people need him now. Kirk suggests that they flee to some nearby caves for shelter to hide from the storm, but the chief says that, when the ground starts shaking, the caves aren't safe, probably because, they might collapse. But they kind of got him here, so not knowing what else to do, Kirk goes to the temple or the obelisk, and not really knowing what else to do, he just starts pounding on it. And of course, then he screams, "I am Kirok!" And this doesn't really work either. Now, Salish has been following him and watches him and sees how completely, incompetent he is and that he's totally failing. And of course, he loves this and he goes back to the tribe to tell them. Back on the Enterprise, Spock has discovered that the symbols on the object are actually musical notes, and that the obelisk was created by an ancient race of aliens known as the Preservers, who seeded various peoples on planets throughout the galaxy. And he and McCoy agree that this must be why there are so many worlds inhabited by human-like people. And this is a big episode in terms of Star Trek lore because it really is important to establish why when they go to so many planets, the people look human. It's because a lot of them are human because they've been taken from Earth and seeded on all these other worlds by the preservers. And in the like in Next Generation, they go, I think, to at least one other planet with that has Vulcans on it. Was it one? It's the Who Watches the Watchers, I think, and it's kind of like this, where they see Picard beam in and they think he's a god or something like that. Okay, and they also realize that the obelisk is some sort of deflector system that is supposed to protect the planet from threats like the asteroid, but it isn't functioning, and they need to figure out how to make it work in order to save the planet. And presumably, these are the ancient secrets of the temple that the previous Metis man died without relating. So on the planet, Salus brings the other villagers. He denounces Kirok as a false god, and then the villagers begin stoning him. And I tell you, man, when these people come to stone somebody, they don't screw around. I mean, they've got a bunch of rocks that are like football sized, you know, like cantaloupe sized. They're not screwing around. And so they start stoning Kirok. Miramani arrives, and of course, she begs them to stop. And Salish says that he can either join them or die with Kirok. And of course, she chooses to die with Kirok. So then they begin stoning both of them. Then McCoy and Spock beam in. Now, when they see Spock, they're sort of horrified at first. And this shot was funny to me because as they beam in, the others, they all stop throwing rocks and they're just sort of, looking at Spock and McCoy beaming in, except for this one guy. He's just turning and walking away like he couldn't care less. I don't know. I feel like this was some sort of mistake or something. But anyway, so then they turn and they flee, obviously spooked by McCoy and Spock's arrival. Now, at this point, Kirk and Miramani are unconscious and injured. Kirk, when they speak to Kirk, he's kind of delirious and he doesn't seem to recognize them. And he does mention Miramani being his wife, and of course they're like his wife. What the heck's going on? They call for Chapel to come down with a trauma kit of some kind, so she beams down. They treat Kirk, and then Sulu calls to warn that the asteroid is only about an hour away. And so they're running out of time. Now, they can't get through to Kirk because, he doesn't recognize them. So they decide to have Spock do a mind meld in order to awaken Kirk's memories. So he mind melds with him and eventually gets through. And again, he starts yelling, "I am Kirk," before he finally wakes up and comes out of it. He reveals that he was inside the temple, but he's also concerned about Miramani. Now, Spock tells Kirk that they don't have much time left, and Kirk says he doesn't know how to get back inside the temple. He agrees that the symbols probably hold the answer. Spock reveals he has deciphered some of it, but they just don't have time for him to learn the rest. Now, he tells Kirk that they're musical notes and that the entry to the temple can probably be done by creating the right notes or sounds. He asks Kirk if he can remember what sounds he made before he got inside the temple. So then Kirk breaks out his communicator and basically does what he did before. He calls the Enterprise and asks to beam up, which, wouldn't you know it, is the just right string of sounds to activate the trap door. So then they go down inside the temple, and they've got the control panel, and then Spock says something about how we have to be careful because the controls have to be operated in the right sequence or it won't work or something like that. But then after saying that, he just pushes one button and it works. So I don't, doesn't seem like it's that difficult, but whatever. But he activates the deflector and it deflects the asteroid away, saving the planet. Then later, McCoy reveals that Miramani has internal injuries and can't be saved. And this is one of the things that drives me nuts about this episode. So, she's been hit with some rocks, okay, and now she's got internal injuries and McCoy can't save her. I mean, are you kidding me? Some simple trauma and you can't save her. I mean, Kirk's like, can you do anything for her, Bones? And McCoy's like, what do you want me to do? She was hit with a rock. I can't help her. And I understand why, because because if you keep her alive, okay, now Kirk has a wife with a kid. Well, what do you do with her? And obviously you got two choices. She can come with them, which obviously they're not going to do because either then one of two things will happen. She's going to come up to the ship, then she's basically just going to disappear and never be on the show because they're not going to be able to afford to have this other guest star on the show every week. And again, they don't want her there because they want Kirk free, to romance a different woman every week. So they don't want that. So what's the other option? Leave her behind on the planet, which means Kirk is abandoning his pregnant wife, which, it's not a good look, and doesn't really fit the character of Kirk as we have come to know him. And so they take kind of the cheap way out, which is to just have her conveniently die. Which again, I understand it, but it's just lame, man. This is just lame. Prime directive, yeah, I guess. I mean, that's one way to justify it. So yeah, I mean, and the thing is that it just makes McCoy look incompetent. It's like you can't fix some internal bleeding, dude. I mean, come on. I mean, in a couple episodes, we're gonna have Spock's brain, and McCoy is gonna literally like perform brain surgery and put Spock's brain back into his body, but he can't fix he can't fix a bleeding liver or something. Give me a break. Anyway, so they express their love for one another, and then she dies, and the episode ends there. And Sabrina Sharf played Miramani. Rudy Solari played Salish. And overall, I give this one a C plus. It's not a terrible episode, but there are some things against it. And in addition to the absurd ending, that's lame. I mean, we just got the whole cheesy plot device of Kirk having soap opera amnesia. Hold on, I hit the wrong thing. There we go. Kirk having soap opera amnesia and conveniently forgetting who he is. So he doesn't remember who he is, doesn't know his name, doesn't know what his phaser is, doesn't know what the communicators are for, but he does know mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He remembers that. He remembers how to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but can't remember his name or what a phaser is. Okay, sure. And then honestly, there's just the kind of cringy element of, just repeatedly having these native peoples worshiping Kirk like a god, which is, it's not a good look. It hasn't aged well. The whole, kind of white savior thing. Although I gotta say, this episode from Salish's point of view, I mean, as villains go, I really kind of sympathize with Salish because this dude gets totally screwed because he's the medicine man. He's like this respected guy, position of importance in the tribe. He's betrothed to Miramani, who is, quite pretty. And then this white cracker mother effer shows up, and doesn't know who he is, doesn't even know what time of day it is. And quicker than you can say white savior, he's got Salish's job and he's given Salish's wife. Is it any wonder he's pissed? I mean, I'm kind of like, yeah, I kind of get it, Salish. I don't blame you. You got done dirty, dude. Although to be fair, I mean, he also, like Kirk, didn't really know what to do, so he couldn't really save them anyway. So in a sense, I guess it is good that they showed up or that the Enterprise came. Okay. Let me take a drink of water right quick here. Hold on just a moment. Okay. Let's see here. All right. So again, this was written by Margaret Arman. Now, Margaret Arman also wrote The Gamesters of Triskelion, one of my favorite episodes, one of the better episodes of the second season. And Gene Roddenberry really liked her work on that episode. So she was invited back to write for the third season. And her first episode is this one, which originally was titled Paleface, is what it was called. And with this episode, she was kind of tapping into this sort of counterculture, sort of sentiments of the hippie movement of the time, which is very much kind of against modern living and kind of getting back to the land and being one with nature and all that kind of stuff. Tuning in. What was the saying? Tuning in, turning on, and dropping out. I believe that's what they said. So Armin said, quote, as far as the story's genesis goes, I thought that these people on a spaceship for years and years have to get awfully sour and have a terrible longing for their home world and the simplicity of an Earth-type nature. So I wondered what would happen if they were just hungry for R&R on an Earth-like planet and they suddenly and unexpectedly come upon a planet which has a primitive but idyllic culture. It touched on man's longing to get back to very simple things, to love and be loved in a simple and open way. Now, in the early version of the story, the obelisk, which Matt Jeffries would later design, was actually described as being a totem pole, much like, many native villages would have, with strange symbols similar to hieroglyphics, which was actually in the center of the village, unlike in this, where it's actually the obelisk is kind of away from them. Now, when Kirk is alone and he touches some of the symbols, the ground opens and he falls through into a subchamber. And in this earlier version, Kirk's amnesia is brought about because he falls and he hits his head. So again, classic soap opera amnesia. Get bonked on the head. Oh, who am I? And I mean, it's a trope used in TV a lot. I think, especially back in the past, because first of all, I don't think neuroscience was as advanced as it is today, but these things were just kind of more accepted, like lie detectors, and hypnosis and stuff like that. Uh, Now, as in the filmed episode, Spock must abandon the search and take the Enterprise out of orbit for its time-sensitive rendezvous and deflection of an approaching asteroid. Kirk, meanwhile, finds his way out of the chamber and wanders into the village, where he's spotted and presumed to be a god. Salish, in this early version, is a warrior next in line to be the chief, and not the son of a medicine priest who died before sharing the obelisk's secrets. Salish opposes Kirk and fights for the right to be chief and to marry Miramani, but after defeat, unlike in this episode, after they fight much earlier in the episode, and after they fight, Salish basically he isn't really important in the plot after that. After about maybe halfway through the episode, I guess. Now, as time passes, Kirk marries Miramani and she has his child. When Spock and his landing party return, Kirk believes they are invaders and actually leads the tribe to attack the Enterprise's landing party. Spock has Kirk beamed to the Enterprise and sedated. The other Indians are also beamed up onto the ship and they become submissive, believing they are in the presence of gods. Spock deciphers the hieroglyphics enough to know that the totem pole is a transmitter for a deflector beam, but he does not know of the underground chamber that Kirk discovered. When Kirk awakes, he attacks Spock, and just as Kirk is about to put a knife into Spock's chest, presto, his memory returns, luckily. And then they beam to the underground chamber and activate the deflector beam and save the planet. The Indians are returned to their camp, and Miramani and Kirk's child included. Because remember now in this version, she actually has the baby. And the original outline for the script tells us, quote, their child, imbued with a heritage from two worlds, will carry on the Mohican culture and pass it intact to succeeding generations. Just as the vanished super race, the Preservers, planned it, Kirk passes his chieftainship to Salish. He knows the fine young warrior will lead and protect the tribe in Miramani. Sadly, Kirk returns to the Enterprise and orders the ship away. He knows that a part of him, the part of man that will always be pagan, will always remain behind, and that a poignant longing for the idyllic life of the noble savage will never leave him. So he abandons his wife and kid, basically. Now, obviously, the script had some issues. One thing is the cost, because another thing in the issues is, or in the early version, is that meteorites and asteroids play a much bigger part in the story. Because I guess the planet is like in an area where there's lots of meteor storms or something. So through the episode, there were repeated asteroid strikes on the planet, and also the Enterprise is getting threatened by asteroids too. And of course, all that had to be cut out because it was too expensive. And Rogue says, amazing how the scripts evolve over time. Yeah, that's one of the most interesting things to me. And one of the reasons why I like doing this is seeing where the story starts and where it ends up, But of course, one of the big things is that these things often have to be changed due to, of course, the constraints of time and the constraints of budget, especially in the third season when budget is reduced and the studio has stricter guidelines on overtime and stuff like that. And I mean, as usual, it goes through several iterations. I'm not going to cover all of it because it would get a bit redundant. Let's see. Okay, now Robert Justman, who of course, was the sort of the set director or set producer, but not the overall producer or showrunner, which was Fred Freiberger. He suggested that instead of making them like North American natives, they should be like Aztecs or something like that, because he felt that just kind of standard North American Indians were a little too familiar. Because remember, there were still a lot of westerns on at the time, and of course, those often had American Indians or natives on them all the time. And he felt that they needed something more unusual or more exotic, but obviously they didn't do that. Um, Jessamine said, quote, I am not as ecstatic about having Kirk marry the girl and get her with a child. I have nothing against the loins of Captain Kirk, but I have a funny feeling that our viewers are not going to like this. And I guess he means him having a family, basically, and then abandoning it. It was certainly controversial for 1968 American TV. Once again, Roddenberry chose to have Star Trek go where no other show would. He was not going to budge on this plot point. So Roddenberry was very persistent on keeping that part of the story. But Roddenberry did meet with Armin, and they went over the story, and then he made some suggestions for changes, which she made. The circumstances which brought the natives to the planet were better explained, because the preservers and all that wasn't really outlined in the original story. It was just kind of suggested. As was, they also played up the idea of Kirk being exhausted with his duties and, him longing for a simpler life and all that. Armin put a great deal of thought into her story and characters. This wasn't just about American Indians relocated to a world about to be smashed by an asteroid, nor was it just about a tired Kirk tumbling into a simpler life, his troubled memory mercifully erased, or Spock experiencing the very human emotion of guilt, a feeling that he has failed his captain, his crew, and the natives of the planet. It was also a story about Miramani, a woman who falls for Kirk and bears his child, and it was about Salish, the man who loses Miramani and his tribal status to a false god. Giving due credit, it was Stan Robertson's idea that Kirk's memory loss be more sci-fi rather than a bonk on the head. And if you remember, Stan Roberts was basically their liaison with NBC, with the network. He made no specific suggestion as to how to remedy this, instead leaving that to Roddenberry and Armin to figure out. But he also wasn't thrilled about the whole idea of Kirk being, worshipped and stuff like that, and suggested that be taken out. But it was played down, I think, a bit from the earlier versions, but not taken out. Roddenberry had other suggestions. The obelisk should be a signpost for other space travelers, telling them who and what is on the planet and asking them not to interfere. This would also help to explain the mechanism protecting the planet from the asteroid belt that routinely threatens it. It was Roddenberry's thinking, even though the script never addressed this, that the lake was actually the site of a crater. And he rejected Justman's suggestion to make the natives descendants of the Aztecs. It would be cheaper, he argued, to keep them as American Indians, and this would also retain the uh, it would basically keep them more familiar to the audience, which he felt was a good thing. And it was Roddenberry's suggestion that Spock use the mind meld to return Kirk's memory instead of having his memory just conveniently come back to him suddenly. Let's see. Okay. Seeing how much the series creator and executive producer wanted the story developed, no matter how controversial and expensive it would be, and that Justman was getting into the spirit of the project, Fred Freiberger ordered a script from Armin. 3 weeks later, bothered that the script hadn't arrived yet, he sent a note to Roddenberry, noting that she was overdue on her script. She would turn it in about a week and a half later, on Tuesday, May 7th, and it would become her first draft. Now, she changed the ending. Yeah, I think I can take that down. Yeah. So there was a new ending now. Miramani hasn't given birth to the child yet, and Kirk no longer makes the decision to leave her. He wants to. He wants her to stay with him on the Enterprise, but after she's brought up to the Enterprise to be treated, she's terrified of the Enterprise and doesn't like it there, and asks to be returned to her people. And Kirk reluctantly lets her do it, returning her and, of course, their unborn child back to the planet, and he leaves her behind again. Roddenberry received a phone call the day the script arrived. Fred Freiberger and Arthur Singer, that's the story editor, had discovered the story and were discussing the story and had some exciting new ideas. What if Kirk didn't have amnesia? The old amnesia angle used in movies and TV rarely rings true anyway, and an erased memory diminishes the excitement of the story by relieving Kirk of worry and the difficult of certain decisions he would have to make. What if the Indians found him and presumed him to be a god? The prime directive would require that he play along. Now, I don't get this reasoning at all. The prime directive requires that he pretend to be a god in order to uphold their beliefs. I don't know. I don't buy that. And this would present a challenge to Kirk, mounting with each new turn of the story. And what would Kirk think happened to his ship and its crew? Where was Spock? Had the Enterprise somehow been destroyed by the asteroid? And what other explanation could there be for it being missing? And how would this sad realization weigh on Kirk, who could carry the additional burden of knowing that this world and these people who looked to him for guidance and protection would all soon perish? Yeah, I'm glad they didn't go that way. That would be, in a way, even lamer. I think having him knowingly deceiving them, pretending like, yeah, I am a god, actually. Let's see. Okay, Margaret Armin revealed that Fred Freiberger went against Robert Justman's recommendation that Kirk be established as exhausted in the beginning of the episode. She said, quote, I like the Paradise Syndrome, but I thought it was too bad that we couldn't get a little bit of Kirk's longing for a simpler life before he beamed down. But Freddie wanted more action and less approach to action. I had a little bit more character building in the situation originally. Oh, you were God too, Rugs? Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. Let's see. And then they did a second draft, and in the second draft, they changed the ending back to where Kirk decides to leave. Again, there's a few memos passed around and suggestions. It was Roddenberry's idea that Spock's attempt to find Kirk and his delaying in leaving the planet result in the failure of the Enterprise successfully deflecting the asteroid. Roddenberry also had an additional concern. By now, the idea of Kirk taking Miramani back to the Enterprise and her becoming terrified of him and his world had been dropped. In TV at this time, the normal way for a recurring character in a TV show to get out of a love affair was for his long sought and recently found true love to conveniently die. And as written in the second draft, that meant the unborn child had to die as well. Quote, working with Gene was marvelous because he was Star Trek and he related to the writers, Margaret Arman said. Fred came in and said Star Trek was, quote, tits in space. And that's a direct quote. I was in the projection room seeing an early episode, and he watched the episode with me, and he puffed on a cigar and said, "Oh, okay, I get it. This show is tits in space." And that didn't sit well with me at all. Of course, Gene was the executive producer, and he really had the last say on approving story ideas. Most different and more important is the handling of the story's tragic ending. Armin had Kirk and Spock beam Miramani up to the ship for medical treatment. She dies in Kirk's arms while in the strange and sterile sickbay. Singer Arthur Singer did a rewrite that kept her on the planet, with the touching death scene taking place back on the in the lodge, and that she and Kirk had so happily shared. These were all improvements, but if he had his way, Freiberger would have severely changed the story or jettisoned it entirely. Margaret Arman later said, quote, I feel the Paradise Syndrome was one that Fred would have let go. Fred was looking for all action pieces. That's really why he wasn't crazy about the Paradise Syndrome. He didn't think there was enough violence and action in it. He didn't realize that the suspense would come from the characters, their relationship, and so forth. There was some action in it, but no monsters. So Fred looked for action pieces, whereas Gene was always looking for the subtlety in the scripts. Action, but with people carrying the story. Quote, to me, it lacked a certain element, Fred Freiberger said. The good thing was that we shot it on location, which was very rare in the third season. That's probably one of the reasons I did it. I wanted to get away from those bare planet sets. Quote, there was no way to do that show on our stages, Robert Justman said. We had to go out, and it wasn't a distant location. It was fairly close, what we would call a local location. Okay, so the original director, this was directed by Judd Taylor. Now, he was not the original director chosen. The original guy hired was Michael O'Herlihy. Michael O'Herlihy was a friend of Roddenberry's, and they had worked together on The Lieutenant. And he came to Star Trek through his relationship with Roddenberry, and he actually directed the first season episode Tomorrow Is Yesterday, where the Enterprise goes back in time to the 60s and they wind up beaming up an American fighter pilot, and then shenanigans ensue and all that. So they originally brought him back to direct this episode, and actually he was going to direct 2 episodes, I believe. This one and then another one. And The Children Shall Lead. He was contracted to do both of them. However, he had a clause in his contracts basically saying that, quote, if Mr. O'Herlihy secures a commitment for a feature film or is called by Walt Disney Productions for a commitment, he may withdraw from either one or both of these commitments with at least 2 weeks' notice. So basically, if he got an offer to direct something else more than 2 weeks before he was scheduled to start on this, then he could opt out. And that did happen, and that's what he did. He was offered a Western film called Smith that was produced by Walt Disney Studios. And as O'Hurley says, at the time, I thought it was the better way to go because it was a feature film basically and not TV. Of course, I don't think anyone really remembers Smith today. I've never heard of it before. So with him opting out, they were in a jam and they needed a director really quick. So that's when they opted for Judd Taylor. Judd Taylor was 28 when he was brought in to replace O'Hurley and direct his first Star Trek. He began his TV career as an actor with numerous appearances in the late 1950s and early 60s. He appeared on the TV show Dr. Kildare, where he played a recurring character. And it was during this time that he got his first shot at sitting in the director's chair. He wound up directing 10 episodes of Dr. Kildare, and he also directed several episodes of A Man Called Shenandoah, which was produced by Fred Freiberger. And it was through that connection with Freiberger that he came to Star Trek. Now, Sabrina Sharf played Miramani. There she is. She was 24 at the time. She was a former Playboy bunny. She had been working in television since 1965 and had already played a Native American in an episode of Daniel Boone. Excuse me. And that episode also had a guest star, which was Jeffrey Hunter, Captain Pike. And she played an assortment of other female characters on television, such as in The Girl from U.N.C.L.E. and on The Wild Wild West. She appeared 2 to 3 times on other popular shows such as Hogan's Heroes, Mannix, and Hawaii Five-0, among others. She was the female lead in a film called Hell's Angels on Wheels with Jack Nicholson. And then she would also appear with Nicholson in the 1969 film Easy Rider. She is one of the female stars in Easy Rider. Now, Rudy Solari played Salish. There he is. And Roche said it's a tit show. Yeah. I mean, they certainly didn't shy away from having hot women on it, which I wasn't complaining. Okay, Rudy Solari. Yeah, so he was 33. He had already been a regular on 3 shows, starting with the 1963 Western. I'm not sure how you say this. Redigo or Redigo, followed in 1965 by The Wackiest Ship in the Army. And then on the World War II drama Garrison's Guerrillas, which had just stopped production a few months earlier. A familiar face on TV in the 60s and 70s, Solari worked often and had been prominently featured in episodes of Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and The Outer Limits, among others. He showed up more than once on 12 O'Clock High, The Big Valley, The FBI, and Ironside. He'd met Freiberger while appearing in an episode of Ben Casey. After this, Joe DaGosta would book Solari for 3 episodes of Mission Impossible. Richard Hale played Goro. He was 76, and he was the chieftain. So you can find a good... There he is. Let's see. He was 76, and he had hundreds of film and TV credits. He had played, Indian chiefs often on TV in westerns such as Gunsmoke, Bonanza, and Daniel Boone, and had worked with Fred Freiberger on the Western Iron Horse. He was also an opera and concert singer. The same year that he did this episode, Hale was featured in The Night of the Sedgwick Curse on the Wild Wild West, with several Star Trek alumni who appeared in that episode as well, including Sharon Acker, who would appear in the episode Mark of Gideon, and Jay Robertson, who had just been in the previous episode Elan of Troyes. And that episode of The Wild Wild West was directed by Marvin Chomsky, who would direct multiple episodes in this 3rd season of Star Trek. Okay, filming began on Tuesday, June 11th, 1968. Now, they did the location shoots in a place called Upper Franklin Canyon, which is in the Hollywood Hills. Let me find that. Yeah, so we got this landscape shot here. So most of them take place in this spot here, which is, by this lake. I mean, it's a very pretty spot. Now, this area, it turns out, is the same forest and the same lake that you would see at the beginning of every episode of the Andy Griffith Show. When you'd see, Andy and Opie kind of walking by a lake, and then Opie would, throw a rock into the lake. This is the same area where that was filmed. For the first 3 days at this location, only Shatner, Nimoy Kelly, and the lighting stand-ins were needed. Um, and during the time they were filming out here, there were actually some roads nearby that produced a lot of noise, and so most of the dialogue in these outside shots had to be redone later through a voiceover. Uh, Douglas Grindstaff had the job of taking the actors through the looping the dialogue. He said, quote, "We'd usually do the sound looping at night after they had finished shooting for the day, and the actors never liked doing it. They were tired, and they'd sometimes nail it right off. Other times it would take longer. Some sessions would go for hours, but they were all very cooperative, except for, surprise, surprise, William Shatner. He didn't like doing it. He was good at it, but he wasn't going to stay and do it over and over, trying to sync it up perfectly. We'd have to make it fit later, trimming a little bit off the picture to fit the voice or whatever we had to do. And we'd add in some background sound to try and smooth it over. It could be tedious work, and actors don't like to do it. And not only after they've been filming all day, but I'd tell them that they'd either do it or we'd have to bring in a voice artist. And, they weren't going to like that. Regarding the obelisk, Matt Jeffries outdid himself once again. The impressive prop was the largest and most expensive prop to appear in the original series. And let me get a better shot of the obelisk here. There we go. Let's see, where was I? Okay, yeah. So they built it out of plexiglass. It was brought in on a flatbed truck, and it weighed a lot. I would say that it was at least 40 feet above the platform that it was sitting on. So in total, it was probably about 50 feet tall. And it was finished all the way around, four sides, which means, like one side wasn't just a facade. They built the whole thing. So the backside was complete as well, not just like they didn't just build half of it and then shoot it at an angle. Oh, and one thing I one thing I did want to point out, which I found kind of amusing. Let me go back here. Where is it? Here we go. Yeah. So in this shot here where Kirk is telling Miramani about, these dreams he's having about a lodge in the sky and all that. So while they're talking, a bug lands on Shatner's forehead and, kind of crawls around on his forehead for several seconds before I guess it flies away. I'm not sure. It just suddenly is gone. And it reminded me of that shot in the Raiders of the Lost Ark where, what's his name? Belloc, it's towards the end, right before the scene where they open the arc, where Indy threatens to blow the arc up with the rocket launcher, and then Belloc basically calls his bluff and tells him to do it. And, they get a close up on Belloc and he's talking, and a fly lands on his face and it like crawls up to his lip. And the way it's done, it looks like that he's like the bug crawls in his mouth and he like eats it or something. But that isn't what happens. It crawled up. Now it flew away, but they just trimmed out like the fraction of a second where the fly is flying off. So it looks like it just crawls in his mouth. And I don't know. This kind of reminded me of that. And Rogue says, they made a lot of mistakes. The man walking away. Yeah, in that one scene, and now a bug. Yeah, I do think uh, so one thing they do mention in here is that although this was his first Star Trek episode, uh, Judd Taylor did get this done on time. He brought it in on time, more or less. They did have some overtime, but he didn't fall behind where he was actually like a day or something behind. They didn't need an extra day of filming to get it done. And so I think they did kind of rush things. And in his defense, again, remember, he did kind of come into this late. He was kind of not the first option. And, I think he came in and just had to hit the ground running to get this thing done properly. Let's see. Okay, day 3. So on day 3, they brought in Sabrina Sharf and uh, Rudy Solari and all the other people playing the native characters. And Majel Barrett was there too because she had a scene. Okay, now the stand-in for the lighting and setups and stuff for Shatner was a guy named Bill Blackburn. And he said in the last sequence with Bill on the pylon, that's when they had the big smoke machines and 2 huge, like, airplane propeller fans going. Let's skip ahead to that part. Yeah, you mean you can kind of see where the wind is kind of blowing their hair and stuff here. And he says, so, we had the fans going, and there's like it's whipping up lots of dirt, and there's debris that was being thrown to kind of simulate a storm, and it was getting into their eyes and in their mouths and stuff like that. And he says, basically, it wasn't fun. They do say that on the set, overall morale was excellent as cast and crew worked on what they felt was another good episode in a row, a third episode in a row. Shatner, in particular, was in good spirits, as actors quite are when they are put in costumes they don't normally wear. Blackburn said, quote, Bill was very professional. He always knew his lines. He was one of those people who could look at a script and he knows his lines very quickly. But then there would be moments where he would suddenly be funny or there would be an attempt at humor or something. It was usually when there was a rough scene to do. And after he finished the scene, it was like a release for him to kind of joke around. And he was very good with the crew. He was always very friendly. It was a fun group to work with because we didn't have anybody getting upset. Everybody got along. It was a nice atmosphere. And I think that had a lot to do with Shatner and how he handled people, and a lot to do with Leonard and with DeForest. I mean, we worked hard and everybody was doing their job, but we were always having fun. We were like a big family. And that's one of one of the few uh, men in this book who actually speaks well of Shatner. um, yeah, so this did get done on time, and it did go over budget though. Um, Robert Justman's assessment of the production from his notes at the time said, quote, very tough show, but finished on time, and this boded well for Taylor, who would return to direct future episodes. And it was about a week after filming had completed that they decided to change the title of the show because at this point, after it had been done and filmed, it was still titled The Paleface. But it was about a week later they decided to change it to The Tahiti Syndrome. Now, even though director Judd Taylor brought the production in on schedule, the first episode of the season to be done in 6 days, the price tag came in at $193,627 or $1.3 million in 2014. When or 2014 when this book was published. This was 15,265 over the allocated budget. The combination of 3 full days of location shoots, the construction of the obelisk, and all the extras escalated the costs. Now, it did pretty well in the ratings. So this aired on October 4th, 1968. And it was number 2 in the ratings with a 30% audience share that night. The CBS movie won the night. It had a 45.9, or basically 40% audience share. 40% audience share. Star Trek was second with 30%, and this show on ABC, Judd for the Defense, was way behind at 15. Now, if I remember right in the previous episode, it actually was second. So it seems like After the first couple of episodes, the interest in this Judd for the Defense show just cratered and people stopped watching it, I guess. I don't know. I guess we'll see as we go on if their ratings stay low. Gerald Gurian, who is a Star Trek archivist and the curator of StarTrekPropAuthority.com, said, quote, "The Paradise Syndrome was a well-written, exciting story with a rare, poignant ending. It is unique amongst original series episodes in that the events which take place in this plot transpire over several months. Fans get to enjoy Shatner portraying a Kirk that is, for the first time, free from the trappings and responsibilities of Starship Command and able to frolic without care in the woods." See, I told you they were frolicking, right? I called it. He says that he is so happy and peaceful and makes a revealing insight how, quote, "I'm not sure, but I think I've never felt that way before." We also see moments of high drama, intense conflict between McCoy and Spock. We cannot help but admire Spock's steadfast perseverance and dedication to, first, deflecting the asteroid and then unraveling the secrets of the symbols on the preserver's obelisk. This is, above all, a timeless and beautiful love story with such memorable musical scores, one of Star Trek's finest hours. I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't be that flattering. It's okay. Let's see. So, The Paradise Syndrome was one of the third season episodes that William Shatner deemed as being extremely good. Fred Freiberger said, quote, "Quite frankly, I wasn't happy with that show. It didn't come out as well as I expected." And Margaret Arman counted, quote, "I think if Gene Roddenberry had been producing the episode, it would have come out better." Dang, shots fired. But who can say? People loved it. I understood that the sponsors' wives really adored it. Okay. Yeah, so overall, I think it's all right. Again, I mean, it's just, the whole contrivance of the memory loss is just kind of cheesy. Her just conveniently dying at the end, and McCoy can't help her is just kind of lame and just really contrived. And the whole, I mean, let's face it, a lot of these scenes, this plot would not fly today. You could not get away with this today. Having all these scenes with these native peoples worshiping a white guy, it just wouldn't work. And it is kind of cringeworthy, honestly, to watch. It's kind of like, just not a good look. But it's all right. Frolicking by Andy Griffiths Lake. Yep. And I wonder where they did it. That shot with Opie and Andy exactly. I don't know. Dances with Wolves. Yeah, yeah, but I mean they don't worship what's his name Dunbar. They don't worship him. The way they do with Kirok here. But yeah, I guess there are similarities in that he kind of assimilates into a tribe. But again, that I don't think that was an unusual trope back in those days. Again, there were a lot of westerns, and I'm sure there were plenty of TV episodes and films that had a white guy joining some native tribe. You know, I mean, they had that in comics with like what's the guy? DC Comics had a character named Scalp Hunter, and that's basically what he is. He's a white guy who's raised among a native tribe. Okay, so that wraps it up for this one. And Rogue says, yes, of course. Yeah, I agree. So the next episode will be the Enterprise incident, which is one of the better episodes of this third season. So I'll be looking forward to that. That'll wrap this up. Please do like the stream, and also please do sub to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks to those such as Rogues 1138 who tuned in for the stream, and those who will catch it on a rewatch. So let's see. After this, so I'll be back on Monday night for the Monday's Mightiest Heroes stream, covering the original Marvel Avengers series with my friends J-Men and Decepticon. And then be back next Tuesday again for another Trek Talk. And that's probably going to do it, as far as for the next week or so. Again, thanks to everyone who tuned in. Good to see you. Good to see you, Rogues. Thank you again for being here. Always appreciate it. When you don't catch it, you rewatch them. Cool. Thank you. Glad to hear that. And I guess that'll be it. So I'll wish everyone good night and catch you next time.